In this video, I want to show how to find the number of correct answers, this time using List.Generate, in order to loop through my number of correct answers and then generate a list which will then contain a 1 if I can find the correct answer inside of my answers column and a 0 if I can't find the answer. The way it will work is that List.Generate will generate a list, and that list will then grow to have one row for each correct answer. So it will loop through the correct answers and create a new list. I'll do this by doing a lookup into my correct answers list using an iterator. So this will be the version of List.Generate which has multiple arguments. To quickly show what I mean, I used the example here in the List.Generate documentation at the bottom, where you have actually two values instead of only one. So I'm saying that I have a starter value, which would be my looper, which is what I use to determine when the loop should end. And then I have a list, which is where I'll compare the current correct answer to my answers column. Without further ado, I want to add a new column where I use List.Generate, and actually I don't want to use the UI in order to add my new column, because I want to store this current answer value inside a variable, which will make it, at least to me, a bit easier to understand. I want to add a column to the previous step. I need to add a new value for each row, hence the each keyword. And right now I'm in the context of my add columns, which means when I create a variable here, that will refer to the current row. And I want to store the intersection between the row and the answers column. So I'll say I want my current answer to be the value in this column. And because my column includes spaces, I need to use the hashtag quotation mark notation. I then want to use List.Generate, which needs to have an initial as function, so an empty function which goes towards. And like I showed before, I need to have a record because I want two variables. One to store my iterator, which I'll use to do a lookup into my correct answers list. And this will be called looper, starting at 0, because lists are index 0 based. Then I want a list, which will contain my answers. And the way this will work is that the list grows longer. So the more answers you have, the more rows you will have. At the end, I only want to extract the last list. I need this initial answer to also be a list, because I want to do list concatenation. I want to start out by comparing. When I'm inside the answers variable, I have access to the looper variable, which means I can do a lookup using the looper. So I want to check whether my current answer contains the text, which is the first correct answer inside my list. In other words, does the text current answer contain the substring, which is then a lookup inside of the best wrappers list using the index of looper. And I need to mind my parentheses because I have 4 right now. So if this evaluates to true, then I want to output a 1, otherwise output a 0. In other words, if there is a match, write 1, otherwise 0. I want to keep looping as long as my looper variable is less than the length of best wrappers list. In this case, I have 2 correct answers, which means once looper is equal to 2, I terminate. Here it's very convenient that lists are index 0 based, because that means when my looper is equal to the length, then I have to stop. So continue looping so long as the current looper value is less than the length of my correct answers list. The value I want in the next iteration is then that, and this is a record, so I need to wrap it in square brackets. I want the next looper variable to be equal to the current looper value, which means I need to wrap this in square brackets because I'm referring to the current iteration sys looper value. And then I want to add 1. So in the first iteration it's 0, in the next it's 1, then it's 2, and then the loop terminates. Meaning I use both the looper variable in order to terminate my loop and in order to do my lookup. My answer variable should then be equal to what it currently is, meaning that has to be wrapped in square brackets. And this was why it took me so long to figure out how to do this solution. I struggled with knowing when I needed the square brackets and when not. But essentially, you could also write an underscore here to showcase that this answers is related to the each keyword. So it's saying this is the current iteration's value. You can decide for yourself if you think this makes it easier to read. And then I actually can just copy this code, because functionally this first line and the third line are actually the same. The only difference is that initially looper has to be 0, and then for each iteration it then has to be its current value plus 1. So I should copy this. I want to wrap this in curly brackets because I need the output of this function to be a list in order to do this concatenation. And actually I already had curly brackets, so I didn't need that. And here I should wrap this in square brackets and say plus 1, again minding my parentheses. That's because each is syntactic sugar for this. And then this isn't actually done, but I want to show what would happen here. So if we want to extract this, I can say I just want the first row. And this is because right now this is a record, because I haven't specified that I only want to return my answer. Now it's returning both the looper variable and the answer. And this is a list with 2 items because I have 2 correct answers. And like I said before, I only want to extract the last one because the second one is equal to the first one plus some more. But I just want to show what it happens. So in the first iteration, I have my looper equal to 0 and a list. And then I have 1 and an error, so I should figure out what that is first. That is because I wrote answers instead of answer, so plural. Yeah, so right there. In my first iteration, my looper variable is equal to 0, and my answer is a list with 0, because I can't find NF in this text string. And in my second iteration, looper is 1, and my list is then the previous value, 0, plus checking whether I can find M&M in this text string, which I can, so the value is to 1. Then I need to change the code because I don't actually need the looper variable. It's only used in order to create the answers list. I do that by adding the fourth argument here, the selector, and all I have to do is to say that I don't want to return everything, the record. I only want to return the answers value. And I want to wrap this in square brackets. And once again, I wrote answers instead of answer, so this is now fine. Just to make it a bit easier, I want to add a filter. We only see one at a time. The first iteration still has the value 0 because I can't find NF, and the second one is the previous value plus checking that I can find M&M. So this was part 1. Unfortunately, this was by far the hardest part, because all I need to do now is to extract the last list within this list of lists. And to make it a bit easier, I'm going to do it by adding a new column, which you shouldn't, because then you just have to delete the original. But this is easier to understand. Since I know I've done 2 loops, because I have 2 values in best wrappers, I can use this in order to extract the last list. So I want to go into the list with matches and extract the item inside the list, which corresponds to list count of the best wrappers list. But this will return 2 because there are 2 items, but lists are index 0 based, which means I need to say -1 on this. And then I extract the last list, and then it's simply doing a list sum on my new list. And at this point, I then have to do what I've shown before, which was to extract how many answers has the person given by counting the number of separators and adding 1, and then subtracting these 2 values. But I won't repeat that again, because you've already seen that. So